Alright, this is my final course reflection. I'm making it a video because I want to say a little bit more than a paragraph. I do have a paragraph of notes per response. Um, I have one paragraph on my section for personal growth and development, uh, which tells me to reflect on my initial perceptions on what I thought the course was going to be like, and how it actually turned out. When I started, I thought I would learn this is weird to say. I thought I would learn like a lot more about, you know, marginalized students. This is what I came in with, was like a lot of research on student language identity and like experience with multi-language learners overseas. Um, so I had this background knowledge, and I actually, like, as the course continued, I like began to realize I was more in community with these like culturally and linguistically diverse students than um, a lot of like my site professors, even at my internships. This took me a really long time to realize because they were in positions of privilege, but they had, never lived outside the U.S. Whereas when I would point out to my students who may be like, my classes might have been like, you know, at least 30% and sometimes like 70% Chicano, I would go, hey, when I came back to the US, if I did something that wasn't, American, people wouldn't act like I was doing something culturally different. People would act like I was doing something wrong because we have this privilege of having a whole continent around us as Americans, uh, so that we can treat our culture like human nature. That's by design. Um, that's the top of the pyramid of cultural imperialism. Um, Another thing uh, was my um, I've been tutoring German this whole time, to a guy who grew up in Mexico, and he's also reminding me of what work is like outside of the U.S. versus like the many of the problems with work culture inside of the U.S. And gaslighting might be an overused term, but I definitely, in retrospect, feel a little bit gaslit by what I thought my experience with like um, belonging to American culture was versus belonging to this kind of more culturally and linguistically diverse um, population. Because when I would tell my Chicano students, if I didn't act like American, if I did something that was weird to Americans, like say a swear word, which is fine in Europe, um, people would act like I was doing something wrong and not like I was doing something different, and they immediately got it, and I was like, why are these kids who like in a couple years I'm gonna be twice their age, um, why do they all understand this experience, but if I try to explain it to like a psych professor, they don't understand. Um, and then as far as like what I got better at, um, that's a perspective that I think improved my confidence as well, or restored it, after living in the U.S., which, as I'm sure you know, right now can be a bit of a nightmare. Um, I also, had a lot more demands, to do clerical stuff like fill out spreadsheets, um, prove that I'm collecting evidence for learning and not just like designing the learning experiences. Um, I think like simple and rote stuff is a weakness for me that almost sounds like a brag, but it's actually a big obstacle. Um, in my first take of this video, I started by lecturing about phenomenology, um, and I don't think that's part of the prompt. All right. So applying the methods that I learned in this course, like I think the thing by far that I use the most now is the idea of a common underlying proficiency, especially with people who are learning a language. It seems like if I use the phrase common underlying proficiency, um, it sounds scientific enough that they go, oh, this is data backed language acquisition. I'm not just doing it for nothing. Um, so, for an example, my mom wanted to learn Spanish, and I said, didn't you already speak French like a couple decades ago? Why don't you do like French Duolingo or something? Why don't you practice your French? Um, and she had a lot of trouble sticking to Spanish, and I said, but it'll build your common underlying proficiency if you study French instead of Spanish. And once you reach like a certain level of fluency and you get used to this kind of language acquisition experience again, then you can start studying Spanish, and it'll be a lot easier. Especially because I know that language confidence is an issue for her, as it is with many students. Um, and she's been keeping up with it this whole time. Um, Whereas I have many, many acquaintances and friends, especially, I don't know, anywhere in the US, people say, oh, I've got to learn Spanish. It's important to learn Spanish. Or if people even have a broader and even less pragmatic outlook, they say, I've got to learn Chinese. You're not going to learn Chinese because you think you have to learn it. You have to like it, at least a little bit. So applying this thing of a common underlying proficiency, talking with students who are experiencing language anxiety but are already bilingual or are already competent enough in English to communicate what they say, saying your common underlying proficiency or whatever student facing vocabulary I would use is already much better than a monolingual's, gives them a lot of confidence. Okay, yeah. Examples of how you applied this. Uh, my German student also, I've been showing him the subjunctive a little bit, and he knows the subjunctive, so um, that's cool. Uh, I think that no was gonna go somewhere. Um, the fact that he appreciates that I can read grammar tables and bring stuff back to his first language, um, which a lot of other people might not be able to do because they didn't study Latin. They're not expert grammar table memorizers and readers. Instead, they know how to speak a language. So, like going forward with my career, this is the future implications and goals section. Um, how this is going to inform my practice as a language educator. Um, I'm going to continue to realize that, like, um, among a lot of jobs, understanding the kind of multi language learner experience and the kind of like cultural outsider experience is somewhat of a unique asset of mine. Aside from other people who might have like careers teaching English as a foreign language. But even then, like at my jobs in my 20s teaching English as a foreign language, a lot of my coworkers would describe me as like the language guy because those are pretty, um, those jobs you only need a bachelor for, and often the bachelor is in like English or something, and my coworkers might not have had any experience in teaching in the past or teaching English as to speakers of other languages. I was talking to my friend who spoke French, and he said it was just much easier to vibe with other multilingual learners in the U.S. Compared to English monolinguals, even without this shared second language, because language learners can tell you put the effort into learning a language that they also had to do, and you understand the experience somewhat of being minoritized. Whereas English monolinguals are completely out of touch with that experience. This is a friend who had also worked overseas through his 20s. Specific goals or areas for growth. That's more clerical stuff, like doing universal design, backwards design, like quickly coming up with especially specific activities, not just like in the abstract. Um, Specific activities that I can use regularly, I hope, that won't also become repetitive and boring. I think there's a very difficult balance between the fact that students, thrive on routine, but they're also easily bored. Um, and then as far as like career career stuff goes, meta career stuff goes, there's another balance uh, to strike, which is um, strictness, how strict I should be, because especially in the U.S., people were telling me I should be a lot stricter. Um, but really, in the U.S., there's less of a conception that students are responsible for their own behavior, especially if they're teenagers, or especially if they're preteens compared to other countries. So that was a cultural experience that I lacked. And I definitely would have had a better experience if I if I hadn't listened at my charter school and had been a little bit more relaxed. Um, because I'm not super great at being strict, and I think part of it is just I'm gonna go back to a country that doesn't infantilize its children as much, because children like have remarkably few rights in the U.S. compared to a lot of other countries. And remarkably few freedoms, few chances to mature outside of their environment, which is extremely sheltered in the U.S. because we don't have these public spaces or public transportation or anything like that students in other countries use, even if they're very young. Um, this is another balance, the ethical considerations and responsibilities associated with teaching bilingual learners. Um, I used to think that it was advocacy for my students, or being aware of my own privilege, is growing more and more aware of whatever my own privileges are. Um, it's not that I don't have privileges or blind spots of normed identities, because everyone does, and I'm sure I'll learn those and sort through them. Um, but my experience going back to the U.S. made me realize that I do kind of have a little bit of an advantage there. Um, and, you know, explaining to someone who belongs to a normed group, that they belong to a normed group, is a lot of the time trying to explain. I think this was in my first cut. This is the phenomenology lecture, trying to explain to a fish that it lives in water. That's why a lot of culturally and linguistically diverse education classes, spend, maybe a quarter of a year on that. So, like, with this shared experience that I have with multilingual learners, like culturally and linguistically diverse students, um, I said, I can't persuade these fish that I can see the water we're in and that they can't. Um, and so, let alone students being able to do that, I really need to um, advocate on behalf of my students and myself, and push back against my superiors. Um, who also really don't like it when you do that, such as when I was arguing that I shouldn't be extremely strict at my charter school job, but it was a charter school, so they all want to be like rich white private schools, um, because they never made the connection that rich white private schools actually lead to success because of the people who belong to the socioeconomic status who go there, and not because of the rich white. The fact that the schools are rich and white, and that they are built in a certain way, which is often like one of those like professional hazing camps, uh, like you'll have in so-called public schools in the UK. So, well, the cat kind of detracts from my perceived professionalism now, but AI exhibits a bias towards people who have bookcases in their background. Um, I'm a white man. I'm wearing a tie. Uh, these are all privileges. My tie is a bit of a privilege that I can use to push back against like admin and that kind of thing, insisting upon uh, cultural perspectives that aren't like in line with the students' experiences that I might have an understanding of and that they might not. So I really have to leverage my privilege in that way. Um, and when I do that, I need to strike a balance between, annoying admin, rocking the boat, and actually, choosing my battles and making sure that a student gets what they need culturally out of the classroom experience. Uh, I think that's it. And that was 17 minutes long. So it's definitely more than a three-paragraph answer. I hope my thoughts were organized enough. But I really wanted to do them justice, and I think I fully explained everything I need to. So thanks for hanging out for this full 17 and a half minutes. I hope you have a nice rest of your day or whatever. Bye.